Welcome to another edition of Hey Bobby with Senior VP with the Cleveland Guardians, Bob DiBiasio. It takes time to join us each week, dedicating his time to really talking baseball. We do that talking about our team, the Guardians, and baseball in general, as we get into some very good discussions about some of the players, the personalities, and of course, the team. And Hey Bobby is brought to you by our good friends at Nika IBEW. And Bobby, speaking of the names and personalities, I think a guy that sometimes doesn't get his just due in Cleveland baseball history is sudden Sam McDowell. This is a guy that was lights out for 6-7 years in the 60s and into the early 70s with our team. And that was during some struggles with wins. But gosh, every time he took to the mound, he put on a show. Matter of fact, he was the pitcher in the very first game I ever went to at Cleveland Stadium. But he was something else. And I know you know Sam, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about Sam McDowell and his place in Cleveland baseball history.
Love talking Sam McDowell. One of my all-time favorite guys to call a dear friend. With all my time, one of the unique things, growing up, Sam was the star pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, and right at that wheelhouse of when I was 10 to 18 years old, just falling in love with the game of baseball. And Sam was the guy on the mound leading the league in strikeouts every year. The one thing you realize when you meet Sam McDowell, I think the first thing is just how big he is. what a big man, 6'5", 6'6". He's a lot heavier these days than he was when he played, but he played at a time when he was 200, 220, just a big fireballer, left-hander. Played for 4 teams in his career, 16 years, I think, something like that in the big leagues, 11 with Cleveland. And he also played with the Giants and the Yankees and finished off 1 year in his hometown with the Pittsburgh Pirates. But think about the incredible idea that here's a guy that made his debut in the big leagues at 18 years old. We talk about young athletes making their big league debut, and if they're really unique, Al Kaline at 19 and Robin Yount at 19 and all of those. Sam McDowell gets drafted or signed by the Cleveland Indians. The draft was not in. We talked last week about Ray Fosse was the first draft in 1965.
Yeah.
So this, he gets his debut in 61, and he's 18 years old, and he's at Cleveland Stadium. He pitches 6 1/3 innings, only gives up 3 hits, no earned runs, walks 5, strikeout 5, and then he ended up pitching through to his 30 till he was 32 years old, 6-time All-Star. But first and foremost, I think one of the things you realize is just what a big man Sam McDowell is.
He limited the base runners too, Bobby. I mean, I believe he led the league in strikeouts like 5 times there in the 1960s. And I don't know. I don't think they did the radar gun back then, but you might know. I mean, he had to get it up in the mid to upper 90s, I imagine.
Yeah, he threw as hard as anybody, but he also had great breaking stuff. His dad taught him the art of pitching. He had an older brother who was a quarterback and a punter. And his dad taught him all the mechanics of that, as well as the mechanics of pitching for Sam. And when he had his tryout, Sam would say that Mel Harder, who was the pitching coach for the Indians at the time, said all this kid needs is experience. He goes, this kid already has the great mechanics. He already has the mechanics of, how to put some spin on a baseball, move it around. This kid just needs to grow and develop in terms of just experience. But you're right. He led the league in strikeouts 5 times in a 6-year period, 1965 through 1970. He also led the league in walks during that time. He also led the league, I think, 3 times in wild pitches during that time, getting the number up to 17 and 18. For example, his 1965 season, he was 17 and 11, had a 2.7. He threw 273 innings.
Wow.
I looked it up this morning that when we talked about, talking about Sam, he led the league with a 2.18 ERA. He walked the league leading 132 guys, but he struck out 325 batters and had 17 wild pitches. Now let's get back to wild pitches, and we'll talk about this kid growing up at a Catholic high school in Pittsburgh, and baseball and football teams were so good that they had trouble scheduling back then teams from Pittsburgh that would be willing to play him. So their baseball team actually scrimmaged and played against in exhibition games the University of Pittsburgh. That's how good their baseball team was. And he would throw batting practice, as a sophomore and junior in high school. The Pirates heard about this kid because scouts were starting to show up from every baseball team to watch him pitch every game. And the Pirates invited him, and he threw batting practice to the Pirates while he was a sophomore. His high school was 2-3 blocks from where the Pirates played, Forbes Field. So he would walk over and throw batting practice. But since he was so wild, Sam would always say that Roberto Clemente would never get into the batter's box against him in batting practice because he just felt he was a little too wild for Roberto.
Now, I know you don't like to pick best, worst, and put them in numerical order because that is always debatable and everything. But there's a Mount Rushmore for sure, probably in Cleveland pitching history. And obviously Bob Feller is on that Mount Rushmore. But let me ask you this. Is Sam McDowell close to that Mount Rushmore? Like I opened up our conversation today, I don't know if he gets his due, but when you look at statistics of everything that guy did, I'm not saying he belongs there, but is he in the conversation of number 4 at all? Or do you think he's just off that?
Well, he was a 6-time All-Star, won 20 games once. Led the league, as we said, in strikeouts. Pretty dominant pitcher, obviously, in his day. Winning 18 here and 17 games there. Bob Lemon has to be number 2 on that list. He won 20 games, something like 6-7 times. Then you can go back to the early days, the Stan Kovalevskis and the Addie Josses and people of that nature that were, some of the best. You think about the run that Corey Kluber had winning 2 Cy Youngs.
There you go. Yeah.
Sit there and argue about current guys. I don't know if he's in the 4 Mount Rushmore, top 4, but yeah, I think you would sit there and when you began discussing pitchers in our history, that Sam would have to be a part of it. 2 things about Sam. In high school, excuse me, in high school, he was 8-0, and he struck out 152 batters in 63 innings. The math comes out to 1.2 per inning. I mean, think about how dominating that is. So when he signed with the Cleveland Indians, everybody remembers how LeBron James went on television at that Boys and Girls Club to announce that he was going from the Cavs to the Miami Heat. When Sam McDowell was graduating from high school and they were having the signings of big league teams were signing youngsters, Sam went on the television show to tell the truth. That's how big a high school athlete he was. Wow. That he was on to tell the truth. Don Amici and a few, and I can't remember the other panelists, but Sam and two other people, he said one was a bespectacled little guy that didn't look like an athlete at all. And then another guy who looked like an athlete, and then him at 6'5", 6'6". And so he made his announcement that he signed with the Cleveland Indians on national television on the television show To Tell the Truth. That's a kind of publicity surrounding him as a high school athlete. So, but as we all know, sadly, he ran into trouble. He had his own demons. He wrote a book called The Saga of Sudden Sam, The Saga of Sudden Sam, The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of Sam McDowell. A very interesting book written by a local author, Marty Gitlin. Again, the name of it is The Saga of Sudden Sam, The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of Sam McDowell. If you're interested in Sam, it's a very interesting piece as to how he comes changes his life 180 degrees in the sense of, having alcohol problems, depression problems, as he's going through his big league career, and succumbed to alcoholism, and then how he fought out of it and became a counselor and a sports psychologist, went to college, got his degree, and worked with the Texas Rangers and the Pirates and the Toronto Blue Jays and their front offices, counseling athletes along the way. So he doesn't sugarcoat any of his life in this book. It's pretty hard hitting in a number of places, but that's the way Sam was. He was a big personality, big man with a big personality, and very honest in his approach, much like Mr. Feller. You ask a question, you're going to get an honest answer. And, I've always enjoyed my relationship with Sam. What a remarkable, after reading the book too, and then learning more about him and his life in Pittsburgh, growing up with a big family. I think they had 9 children or something. Just a remarkable guy.
VP with the Cleveland Guardians, Bobby DiBiasio, with us on another edition of Hey Bobby. And Bobby, to wrap up this week's show, a couple of minutes, because we're all going to the ballpark this time of year and enjoy looking around from the left field line to the right field line. I know you know a lot about the dimensions of the outfield, because I think our outfield is unique in the world of baseball. It's not cookie cutter. You've got the left field wall, you've got the jagged angle in center field, and then in right field, the lower fence. And I know you know a lot about how that was put together and why that was put together that way. And I thought maybe you could talk about that.
Well, when John Hart and the group decided to lay out Progressive Field, Hank Peters talking to architects and them giving us concepts, designs as to what the uniqueness of our ballpark could look like. Now, the first and foremost thing you have to remember when you look at Progressive Field, it's like dropped as a spaceship, just dropped into the middle of 3 main streets in downtown Cleveland. So on the east side, you have East 9th Street going north and south. And then you have on the west side, Ontario Street going north and south. And then east and west is Carnegie Avenue. That's why you see our ballpark as a right angle 90-degree angle in right field, because that's the corner of Carnegie and East Ninth. That's the way it had to fit in that small acreage. And then the architects were saying, here's what we can do technology-wise. We can put an out-of-town scoreboard in a left field wall, so that the big scoreboard above the bleachers could handle more images and more information, and your out-of-town scoreboard is in a different location. And so that required a 19-foot wall. And our guys really enjoyed what that look might be. So we decided 325, John and Hank and the group said, okay, we'll be symmetrical at least down the line. So that will be 325 be equal down the left field line and the right field line. And then in dead center field, it's about 405, 9 feet wall from that center field to right field line. It extends to 375 when you get to right center. So it's got some nooks and crannies. It's not just your circular normal ball field that Cleveland Stadium had. So that gives it the look. You know, Baltimore had that little bit of a right field wall look over on that side of the field, and they moved it. Same architects, HOK back then, that did Camden Yards and us and PNC and many of the ballparks, Kansas City. And so they decided to flip-flop and put our left field with the big wall and have the home run porch. And, you know, it still plays to some real fun bounces and excitement. Yeah, the idea that just didn't want that circular outfield kind of feel to it, that it had to have a little bit of difference as you go around the ballpark.
Give it its own personality.
Yeah.
With Progressive Park or Progressive Field, as Bobby says, playing a ballpark, not a stadium. My friend, good visit again. We'll talk about a homestand coming up next week for us, and always appreciate the time, my friend.
Well, thank you, Ray. Yeah, next homestand, let's see if we can get to 90,000 fans like last weekend did against the Cardinals. That was awesome to see. Our fans came out in great numbers. It was a good series win. Let's see if we can do that again.
Sounds good, Bobby. Thank you for the time.
See you, Ray.